The Stage Door Show, celebrating the independent artist. Hosted by Dave Hondel.
Hi everyone, welcome to The Stage Door Show. This is Dave Hondel. Tonight, our guest is an award-winning film director and writer who has over 20 years experience in the industry. He's also the director of a new 8-episode series entitled Chaser, out now on demand on Prime Video. We're so excited to have him with us tonight. So please welcome to the show, Mr. Daniel Roemer. Thanks for being with me, Dan.
Yep. Thanks for being here.
Well, you know, I mentioned before we started recording that we had Russ Russo, the star of the series that you directed. And, you know, I was just enamored with this. It's great, a storyline. And, you know, as an editor yourself, I know you've done a lot of editing, and you know, so the storyline with him being able to edit the last 24 hours, I think it's a great premise for a show. So talk about how that all became to be the show itself, and then, you know, how you became attached to it.
Yeah, it's kind of loosely based on a film that I did many years ago. And in the short, it's only 3 minutes, but the guy was able to rewind this dialogue and sort of cut words together to make it say what he wanted it to say. So it's kind of a comment on, like, you know, if you could, you know, basically control life the way you wanted it, you know. But that was sort of the beginning of like the long-term idea, which, you know, the TV series, that's almost like the small nugget that gets you in to watch it. You know, what if you could re-edit life? And then, you know, then it gets into all the characters and, you know, all the kind of the thickness of everything. So that was the germ of it right there.
Looking at your past, I mean, it's incredible. Project Greenlight, you know, two times you were in the top 20 directors of that, Ben Affleck and Matt Damon's show. Also on the lot, Steven Spielberg's show. And out of thousands and thousands of people, you know, at what point did you know that you had the talent to do this, to be a writer and director and be at such a high level? I mean, at what point did you know?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a big part of growing as an artist is sort of like coming into an understanding of like the truth of where you're actually at. Because like sometimes like you can be both. You could think maybe you're better than what you are, or you can think maybe you're like lower than what you are. And then at some point, like you just get enough feedback from enough people over the years, and you kind of start to figure out like maybe where the reality is. But yeah, definitely those things help, because like when you have, like, I would say like higher level people that are confirming, you know, what you're working on and things like that. You know, those are the ones that you actually want to pay attention to anyway, because, you know, if it's somebody that, you know, doesn't really care about movies or anything like that, like if they don't like your film, then it's like, you know, you shouldn't really be affected by that too much. But yeah, it always feels good if you have your peers that you look up to like your stuff.
You know, and one of the other things, you know, as an editor, because, you know, I've done a lot of editing myself, and I think that you can take your story, you can write it and direct it, but if something isn't edited the way you want to, or it doesn't talk to your vision, it doesn't turn out like how your vision is supposed to be. So talk about the importance of editing, and talk about the importance of being involved with the editing process if you're not the editor, to make sure that your story is being told the right way. I mean, so talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, editing's tricky because it's like infinite. You literally there's no end to the combinations of reaction shots and pauses, and so if you're like a perfectionist, which I definitely am a perfectionist, it can take you a long time to edit something. Whereas if it's like another person editing your material, they may not be as like tied to it emotionally. So yeah, I would say that was difficult. But on the other hand, it's nice to edit your own stuff, because then, you know, it's like I've gone through every line, I know every little take, and I know there's nothing being skipped over.
Yeah.
You know. So it's like a double-edged sword, I would say.
You know, another thing about editing that's important, well, I mean, about being a director as well, but picking the right music to go with your with your project, because if the music's wrong too, it could ruin a project. So how do you work with that with the music supervisor to get the right sound and the right music to make sure that your story is being told that way as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's some people when they edit, they just will not put music in until the very end. It kind of messes them up. For me, I'm the opposite. Like I usually start with a track and then I'll edit the scene to the music, usually like a temp track, or if I can get the composer I'm working with to actually give me original music, like sometimes it'll end up being the same song that ends up in the final cut, or often it'll be like maybe I'll end up using that song somewhere else and switching it out. But it just helps me. And I call it the way in because everybody needs a way in to, it could be writing or editing, but definitely editing. You need somehow to get your mind into the scene. And for me, music is huge. It's like you put a different track underneath your edit and it like completely changes the whole mood.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I was lucky enough to work with Rob Hemmick. He was the composer that worked with us from the main chunk of it. And then a guy named Jeffrey Birch helped us a little bit as well at the end. And they had a different vision of what, or I originally thought the music would be. Like eventually I just surrendered to it, and they were totally right. Like Rob was totally right about that. So that was a little bit of humble pie that I had to bite there.
Well, how do you, I mean, and that's a good point. And that's one of the things that, I like to bring up in a lot of our shows with our listeners that are in the arts, and sometimes as an artist, it's hard to give up your vision. It's hard to give up sometimes the control of certain things. So talk about the importance of collaborating and sometimes giving up control a little bit to make sure that because a lot of times when people, especially music, if you're talking to a music supervisor or somebody that's been doing this for a long time, they probably know what's going to create a mood, right? So talk about collaborating with other people on the project.
That was one of the things that originally drove me to want to make movies in the first place, is that it's a collaborative art form. I think beyond any other art form, you're collaborating with hundreds of people. So, you see the end of a film and it's just the credits go on and on and on. Well, the director is literally collaborating with all those people, all those personalities, and I think it can be like a wonderful thing as a director to be able to do that. And I think your job is to really figure out who you want to hire, and then you sort of have to trust them. So it's like your real job is like up front, and it's like, okay, this guy, I think it's going to do the best job to finish the vision, and then you kind of have to listen to him. And it's also important to hire someone that you feel like you can collaborate with, because you don't want to like butt heads with them the whole time, and
Right.
So yeah, that's a beautiful thing about film, I think.
Yeah, you're right though about that, because you do collaborate with a ton of people. And growing up in Ohio, I'm curious how you started in this business in the first place. Because growing up in Ohio, I grew up in Minnesota. Not a huge market. And before you moved out to California to go to school, how did you get that bug to be a filmmaker? I mean, how did it all start? Did it start when you were really young, or did it start like later on?
Yeah, I think it started really when I was about 4. So being from Ohio, and you definitely know this from where you come from, where
Yeah.
ice hockey is big.
Yeah.
Well, they used to flood our tennis courts in the winter, and it would freeze over, and then people would ice skate on it. So my dad would take myself and my siblings down there, and he would film us with his old Super 8 camera. And what he would do is after we were skating around, he'd take us back, and then he'd project it, but he would play it backwards. And, I don't know, to my little 4-year-old brain, that just like blew my mind as we like skated backwards. And I think that always like stuck in my head, and it's manipulating reality. And that's kind of what this whole series is about.
Yeah, for sure. And, and one of the things that, making films, and for my listeners out there who maybe don't have a big budget or any budget at all, but they have an idea and they want to get it out there, what the way phones are right now. I mean, the they're amazing how they can, project such a great HD, look. So talk to my listeners about, if you have a story, just do it, right? I mean, just go out and make something and create something. And I think a lot of people think you need a huge set and a lot of people on the set and, trailers for the actors and everything like that. But, sometimes you just got to go make your story, right? I mean, so talk about the importance of getting your work out there and just getting your art created.
Yeah, there's kind of like, I would say, two types of approaches, and I've done them both. And the one approach is, okay, you don't have very much money, but you're gonna just max out your talent and your brain, and you're just gonna use it all and just try to make the end product look like way bigger than the amount of money that you have. So that's one way. And then the other thing is, it's like, okay, I have this amount of money. We're both are in low budget scenarios, but the second one is like, I only have this amount of money. I'm going to make a small concept to where that small amount of money it's actually maybe more than I need. So I've recently I did like a music video where I had like still was a smaller budget, but I decided to go for a concept that was like pretty simple. So in that sense, it was like kind of a lot of fun to make. But I would say Chaser's more on the other end of the spectrum where we were kind of shooting for the stars, even though we still had a very small, modest budget.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. It's definitely an interesting thing. And you're totally right about the phones. Like the phone that I have now, I mean, it's unbelievable the images you can get. So it just kind of opens up a whole nother world.
Yeah. Yeah, and talk about the importance of building partnerships and networking in the business, because you've been doing this for a long time. I mean, over 20 years, and talk about the importance of building partners in the business too, because you might not know it, but you might work with the same person several times down the road. You don't realize. So talk about the importance of that and being good to people.
Yeah, I think it kind of happens naturally, like whether you want it to or not. It's just it's like maybe like making friends, that kind of just happens naturally. And I like to work with people I've worked with before because you know what you're getting into. If you work with a cinematographer you've worked with before, or an actor, especially with actors, because you can actually, when you're writing, you can like write with them in mind, the cadence of how they talk and things like that. So I think I prefer to work with people I've worked with before, but sometimes you want to like try something new too. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's maybe a little bit of a combo. But yeah, it's all though everybody always says in the film industry, it's all about who you know, but you can't really like force that. It just has to happen over time.
Right. And also, do you ever work with, I don't know what if your directing style is by the book and how it's written, but do you ever give the actors the ability to improv anything or to kind of make a scene their own, or what's your directing style like that?
Definitely, yeah. I'm almost maybe too guilty of that because what'll happen is I got to make sure that the story points get told.
Sure.
Otherwise, you're in the edit room and you're like, oh crap, like
I shouldn't have let them do that. Yeah.
yeah. Because I always kind of err on like reality. Like I want it to sound real, like
Right.
it's sound honest, But like there are some times where you just need them to say it like very clearly,
Yeah.
So yeah, and that's like my favorite thing. Like working with the actors, that's got to be my favorite thing.
Yeah, just let them
We talk about that all
if it
day.
makes sense, right? I mean, if it makes sense to the story, let them do it. Yeah. In 2010, you directed a feature film called Gray, and you filmed it in Ohio. How was that like to go back to your hometown and film this in your old stomping ground, so to speak?
Yeah, that was a much different film. That one we filmed entirely in the forest. We were walking around, we had like a steady cam. That was right when the Red camera just came out. And it
Yeah.
was like we were like one of the first 600 cameras that came out. So it was breaking down all the time. And
Yeah.
it was real interesting. But this one we had a lot of various locations, and that's what I think I love about the Mansfield area. it's just there's just so many types of different locations, and there's a lot of age. There's brick, there's forests, there's fields, there's corn,
Yeah.
pretty much everything. Um, and then it also has like a small town charm to it, shops and things. Um, yeah, so yeah, between the two films, well, when the first film, Gray, at the time, that was like, man, this is the hardest film I've ever made. And then once we did Chaser, I'm like, man, this is the hardest film series,
It's
I
getting
guess. But
harder.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I think every film is just going to be, this is the hardest
This
one.
is the hardest. Yeah. Well, it means, I mean, it obviously means that you're challenging yourself more too. I mean, I think that as you continue to do films, which you've done many, many, many films, but it continues to challenge you. I think it's great. And then, like you said, with the budget, it makes it even more of a challenge, which I think it's even that more successful when it comes out great. One of the things I was going to ask you about evolving, like the technology evolving, because obviously years ago everything was done with Panavisions, Panaflex cameras, and we kind of evolved more towards the kind of a digital, I guess, platform. Has that happened for you in some of the some of your projects where it kind of is now more digital than it was film, and it's easier, quicker to do projects and to edit, so forth?
Yeah, definitely. Some of my very early stuff, the first kind of bigger short film I made was in the year 2000s, 2000, and that was 35 millimeter. And then the one after that was also 35. Um, so yeah, it's kind of cool because it's like it forces you to be very structured. It's like, okay, you got to figure out your film ratio, and you can't just like roll it forever. So in some sense, it like gives you this like structure that I think filmmakers and creative people need structure sometimes to
Yeah.
help them. Um,
So you don't do 20 takes every time. Yeah.
right. It's like you get greedy.
Yeah.
But yeah, now I mean you wouldn't be able to tell much of a difference between what, like recently I just shot something on the Arri Alexa, uh and I mean it looks great, but you wouldn't be able to tell a whole lot of a difference between that and like 35.
You did obviously some, I mean, film festivals, not just here in the United States, but also overseas. And do you find film audiences can they differ between here and overseas? I mean, what do you think?
I definitely think it's true. Yeah, I've actually had more, I don't know, success maybe isn't the right word, but it seems like a lot of the projects that I've worked on are received well in Europe. And I think maybe it's just a sensibility of this. I tend to like maybe more subtle stuff. I think Europe and definitely the UK, there's they value, I think, like I said, yeah, it's like more of like a subtle approach, especially to like the acting. In the US, it's maybe a little bit more over the top, the acting. Um, but it's just preference. I have friends that like a TV show like New Girl or something. It's very heightened, the acting. But over here you have maybe something like Black Mirror or something like early seasons where it's like more subtle.
You find a difference in directing like a TV series versus like a feature film and how you approach it? Because obviously the series is a lot, it's not sometimes it's a half an hour, sometimes an hour, but with film, it's obviously 90 minutes or more. So how do you approach it differently, depending on if it's film or TV?
That's a good question. And to be honest, this one actually started out as a film. Like
Oh,
the original script was written for a film, and we actually recut it into a TV series when we were in the edit room, and we couldn't get the pace of the project to where we wanted it. Like it was always coming in around 2.5 hours,
oh,
and
okay.
we couldn't really make that work. So we actually went back to the drawing board and restructured it into the series then. And so now it's at about 3 hours back to back if you watch all 8 episodes.
Sure.
The pacing feels just about right. Like, so I can't imagine trying to like make people watch a 3 hour feature film. Um, but yeah, that's it's definitely a different world because you can go on tangents. I tend to, maybe you can tell by the way I talk, but I tend to go off tangents and think about rabbit trail here, da, da,
Sure.
da. And I think TV lets you do that. You know, you can just take a whole episode. Like think about Breaking Bad. They had like a whole episode on basically trying to kill a fly. You
Yeah.
know, that was
Yeah.
brilliant. You know, only in TV. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. And also there's 8 episodes now, but I mean, is there a chance to do another season if it's, if with the success of it? I mean, if it's, could it be picked up for more?
Yeah, definitely. If it goes over well, kind of left, I'm not going to ruin the ending, but, I sort of purposely wrote it in a way that it could continue naturally into a next episode or maybe in a third too.
Well, that would be incredible. That would be awesome. And I mean, the trailer alone is incredible. Let's put it that way. So, very, very well done. Like as I told you before, we do have a lot of people that listen that are artists. So, I'd like to ask for advice. What's your main piece of advice for somebody who's a writer, director, aspiring, maybe in film school or about to go to film school? So, what would you tell that young person that's about to get into this industry? What kind of advice can you have for them?
I think looking back on my own life, I think it's just, try to do stuff that it's fun to do because, it's like you have one life to live. So like work on projects that not like you think you're supposed to do because like, oh, this is the path to Hollywood or this is, whatever. No, just like create stuff. I think ideally with people that you like to make it with, your friends, and that it's fun. Because I've definitely done a lot of projects where it's like it feels like I've burned years trying to make this like amazing film and it may or may not turn out how I wanted it. But in the end, I'm like, look back, I'm like, was that actually fun? Most
Yeah.
of them, but that's definitely now going into the rest of my life. That's like my main goal. It's like, this has to be fun.
Yeah.
So.
So you have to enjoy what you do, right? That's great advice. And, before we leave, I just wanted to ask you this question that I ask everybody. But when it's all said and done, Daniel, what do you want your legacy to be? What do you want people to think of when they think of Daniel Roemer?
I like to just in everyday life, I like to be a person that kind of pops someone out of maybe the typical 9 to 5 grind. People get into, I don't know, it's like inundated with repetition over and over. And sometimes I like to say something or, make a comment on what someone's wearing and it just kind of snaps them out and they smile. So I would like to be remembered for that. Maybe artistically, hopefully my projects do that, give someone a little bit of a wake up or a smile or a laugh. But also just in life, I would like to be remembered as someone that does that.
That's great. For everybody listening, Chaser is out now on demand, Prime Video. So make sure you go check that out. 8 episodes and hoping for another season after this. But thank you for joining us, Daniel. It's been a pleasure and much success to you in your future.
Thank you.